Let us begin chapter 9 of the Neverending story. Spook City. In the endless sky, somewhere above the roaring waves, Falcor's voice rang out like a great bronze bell. Atreyu, where are you, Atreyu? The wind giants had long finished their war game and had stormed apart. They would meet again in this or some other place to continue their battle as they had done since time immemorial. They had already forgotten the white dragon and his little rider, for they remembered nothing and knew nothing except their own enormous power. When Atreyu fell, Falcor tried to reach him and catch him, but a sudden whirlwind had driven the dragon upward and far away. When he returned, the wind giants were raging over another part of the sea. Falcor tried desperately to find the place where Atreyu had fallen, but even a white luck dragon can't possibly find anything as tiny as a little boy in the seething foam of an angry ocean. But Falcor wouldn't give up. He flew high into the air to get a better view. Then he skimmed the waves or flew in larger and larger circles, all the while calling Atreyu by name. Atreyu wandered through the deathly stillness of a deserted city. The place seemed to be under a curse, a city of haunted castles and houses, inhabited only by ghosts. Like everything else in this country, the streets were crooked. Enormous spider webs were suspended over them, and a foul smell rose from the cellars and well shafts. At first, Atreyu darted from wall to wall for fear that someone would see him. But after a while, he didn't even bother to hide. The streets and squares were deserted, and nothing stirred in the houses. He went into some of them, but found only overturned furniture, tattered curtains, broken china, and glassware. Signs of devastation, but no inhabitants. On one table, there was still a half-eaten meal, dishes with black soup in them, and some sticky chunks of something that might have been bread. He ate some of both. The taste was disgusting, but he was very hungry. It struck him as almost fitting that he should end up in this town. Just the place, he thought, for someone who had given up hope. Bastian was weak with hunger. For some strange reason, his thoughts turned to Anna's apple strudel, the best apple strudel in the whole world. Anna came 3 times a week. She would do a bit of typing for Bastian's father and put the house in order. And usually she would cook or bake something. She was a strapping, bouncy woman with an unrestrained, cheery laugh. Bastian's father was polite to her, but seemed hardly aware of her presence. She was seldom able to bring a smile to his worried face, but when she was there, the place was a little bit more cheerful. Though unmarried, Anna had a little daughter. Her name was Krista. She was 3 years younger than Bastian, and she had beautiful blonde hair. At first, Anna had brought Krista with her almost every time. Krista was very shy. Bastian spent hours telling her his stories, and she would sit there still as a mouse, watching him wide-eyed. She looked up to Bastian, and he was very fond of her. But a year ago, Anna had sent her daughter to a boarding school in the country. Since then, she and Bastian had seldom seen each other. Bastian had been rather cross with Anna. She had tried to explain why it was better for Krista, but he wasn't convinced. Even so, he could never resist her apple strudel. He wondered, in his distress, how long a person could go without eating. 3 days? 2? Maybe you'd get hallucinations after 24 hours. On his fingers, Bastian counted the hours he had been there. At least 10, maybe more. If only he had saved his sandwich, or at least his apple. In the flickering candlelight, the glass eye of the fox, the owl, and the huge eagle looked almost alive. Their moving shadows loomed large on the attic wall. Atreyu went on into the streets again, and wandered aimlessly about. He passed through neighborhoods where all the houses were small and so low that he could reach up to the eaves, and others lined with mansions many stories high, the fronts of which were adorned with statues. But all these statues were of skeletons or demons, which grimaced down at the forlorn wanderer. Then suddenly he stopped, stock still. From not far away he heard a raucous wailing that sounded so plaintive, so hopeless, that it cut him through the heart. All the despair, all the desolation of the creatures of darkness was in that lament, which echoed back from the walls of distant buildings, until, in the end, it sounded like the howling of a scattered wolf pack. Atreyu followed the sound, which gradually grew weaker and ended in a hoarse sob. He had to search for some time. He passed the gateway, entered a narrow, lightless court, passed through an arch, and finally came to a damp, grimy backyard. And there, chained, lay a gigantic, half-starved werewolf. Each rib stood out separately under its mangy fur. The vertebrae looked like the teeth of a saw, and its tongue dangled from its half-open mouth. Slowly, Atreyu approached him. When the werewolf noticed him, it raised its great head with a jerk. A greenish light flared up in its eyes. For a time, the two looked at each other without a word, without a sound. Finally, the wolf left a soft, dangerous growl. "Go away. Let me die in peace." Atreyu didn't stir. Just as softly he answered, "I heard your call. That's why I came." The werewolf's head sank back. "I didn't call anyone," he growled. "I was singing my own dirge." "Who are you?" Atreyu asked, taking a step closer. "I'm Gmork the werewolf." "Why are you lying here chained?" "They forgot me when they went away." "Who are they?" "The ones who chained me." "Where did they go?" Gmork made no answer. He watched Atreyu from under half-closed lids. After a long silence, he said, "You don't belong here, little stranger. Neither in this city nor in this country. What have you come here for?" Atreyu bowed his head. "I don't know how I got here. What is the name of this city?" "It is the capital of the most famous country in all Fantastica," said Gmork. "More stories are told about this country and this city than about any other. Surely you've heard of Spook City and the Land of Ghosts." Atreyu nodded slowly. Gmork hadn't taken his eyes off the boy. He was amazed that this green-skinned boy should look at him so quietly out of the black eyes and show no signs of fear. "And who are you?" he asked. Atreyu thought a while before answering. "I'm nobody." "What do you mean by that?" "I mean that I once had a name. It can't be named anymore. That makes me nobody." The werewolf bared his hideous fangs for a moment in what was no doubt intended as a smile. He was familiar with mental anguish of every kind and sensed a certain kinship with the boy. "If that's the case," he said, "then nobody has heard me, and nobody has come to me, and nobody is speaking to me in my last hour." Atreyu nodded again. Then he asked, "Can nobody free you from your chains?" The greenish light in the werewolf's eyes flickered. He began to growl and to lick his chops. "You'd really do that?" he blurted out. "You'd really set a hungry werewolf free?" Do you know what that means? Nobody would be safe from me.
I know, said Atreyu, but I'm nobody. Why should I be afraid of you? He wanted to approach Gmork, but again the wolf uttered his deep, terrifying growl. The boy shrank back. Don't you want me to set you free? He asked. All at once the werewolf seemed very tired.
You can't do that. But if you come within my reach, I'll have to tear you to pieces, my boy. That would delay my end a little bit, an hour or two. So keep away from me and let me die in peace.
Atreyu thought it over. Maybe, he said finally, maybe I can find you something to eat. I'll look around. Slowly, Gmork opened his eyes. The greenish fire had gone out of them.
Go to hell, you little fool. Do you want to keep me alive until the nothing gets here?
I thought, Atreyu stammered, that maybe if I brought you food and you were full, I could get close enough to take off your chain.
Gmork gnashed his teeth. Do you think I would have bitten through it myself if this were an ordinary chain?
As though to prove his points, he clamped his jaw on the chain. The chain jangled as he tugged it and pulled at it. After a while, he let it go.
It's a magic chain. Only the person who put it on can take it off, but she will never come back.
Who is that?
Gmork whimpered like a whipped dog. It was some time before he was calm enough to answer. It was Gaia, the Dark Princess.
Where's she gone?
She has leapt into the nothing like everyone else around here.
Atreyu remembered the mad dancers he had seen outside the city in the foggy countryside. Why didn't they run away? He murmured.
Because they had given up hope. That makes you beings weak. The nothing pulls at you, and none of you has the strength to resist it for long. Gmork gave a deep, malignant laugh.
What about yourself? Atreyu asked. You speak as if you weren't one of us. Gmork watched him out of the corner of his eye.
I'm not one of you.
Then where are you from?
Don't you know what a werewolf is?
Atreyu shook his head.
You only know Fantastica, said Gmork. There are other worlds. The world of humans, for instance. But there are creatures who have no world of their own, but are able to go in and out of many worlds. I am one of those. In the human world, I appear in human form, but I'm not human. And in Fantastica, I take on a Fantastican form, but I'm not one of you.
Atreyu sat down on the ground and gazed at the dying werewolf out of great dark eyes. You've been in the world of humans?
I've often gone back and forth between their world and yours.
Gmork, Atreyu stammered, and he couldn't keep his lips from trembling. Can you tell me the way to the world of humans?
A green spark shone in Gmork's eyes. He seemed to be laughing deep inside. For you and your kind, it's easy to get there. There's only one hitch. You can never come back. You'll have to stay forever. Do you want to?
What must I do? Atreyu asked. His mind was made up.
What everyone else around here has done before you. You must leap into the nothing. But there's no hurry, because you'll do it sooner or later in any case, when the last parts of Fantastica go.
Atreyu stood up. Gmork saw the boy was trembling all over. Not knowing why, he spoke reassuringly.
Don't be afraid. It doesn't hurt.
I'm not afraid, said Atreyu. But I never expected to get my hope back in a place like this. And thanks to you.
Gmork's eyes glowed like two tiny green moons. You have nothing to hope for, sonny. Whatever your plans may be, when you turn up in the world of humans, you won't be what you are here. That's the secret that no one in Fantastica can know.
Atreyu stood there with his arms dangling. What will I be? Tell me the secret. For a long time, Gmork neither spoke nor moved. Atreyu was beginning to fear that the answer would never come, but at length the werewolf breathed heavy and spoke. What do you think I am, Sonny? Your friend? Take care. I'm only passing the time with you. At the moment, you can't even leave here. I hold you fast with your hope. But as I speak, the nothing is creeping in from all sides and closing around Spook City. Soon there will be no way out. Then you'll be lost. If you stay and listen, your decision is already made, but you can still escape if you choose. The cruel line around Gmork's mouth deepened. Atreyu hesitated for just a moment, then he whispered, Tell me the secret. What will I be in the world of humans? Again, Gmork sank into a long silence. His breath came in convulsive gasps. Then suddenly he raised himself on his forepaws. Atreyu had to look up at him. And then for the first time he saw how big and terrifying the werewolf was. When Gmork spoke, his voice was like a jangling of chains. Have you seen the nothing, Sonny? Yes, many times. What does it look like? As if one were blind. That's right. And when you get to the human world, the nothing will cling to you. You'll be like a contagious disease that makes human blind. So they can no longer distinguish between reality and illusion. Do you know what you and your kind are called there? No, Atreyu whispered. Lies, Gmork barked. Atreyu shook his head. All the blood had gone out of his lips. How can that be? Gmork was enjoying Atreyu's consternation. This little talk was cheering him up. After a while he went on. You ask me what you will be there, but what are you here? What are you creatures of Fantastica? Dreams, poetic inventions, characters in a never-ending story. Do you think you're real? Well, yes, here in your world you are. But when you've been through the nothing, and you won't be real anymore. You'll be unrecognizable, and you will be in another world. In that world, you Fantasticans won't be anything like yourselves. You will bring delusions and madness into the human world. Tell me, Sonny, what do you suppose will become of all the Spook City folk who have jumped into the nothing? I don't know, Atreyu stammered. They will become delusions in the minds of human beings. Fears when there's nothing to fear. Desires for vain, hurtful things. Despairing thoughts where there is no reason to despair. All of us? Asked Atreyu in horror. No, said Gmork. There are many kinds of delusions. According to what you are here, ugly or beautiful, stupid or clever, you will become ugly or beautiful, stupid or clever lies. What about me? Atreyu asked. What will I be? Gmork grinned. I won't tell you that. You'll see. Or rather, you won't see, because you won't be yourself anymore. Atreyu stared at the werewolf with wide-open eyes. Gmork went on. That's why humans hate Fantastica and everything that comes from here. They want to destroy it, and they don't realize that by trying to destroy it, they multiply the lies that keep flooding the human world. For these lies are nothing other than creatures of Fantastica who have ceased to be themselves and survive only as living corpses, poisoning the souls of men with their fetid smell. But humans don't know it. Isn't that a good joke? And there's no one left in the human world, Atreyu asked in a whisper, who doesn't hate and fear us? I know of none, said Gmork. And it's not surprising, because you yourselves, once you're there, can't help working to make humans believe that Fantastica doesn't exist. Doesn't exist? The bewildered Atreyu repeated. That's right, Sonny, said Gmork. In fact, that's the heart of the matter, don't you see? If humans believe Fantastica doesn't exist, they won't get the idea of visiting your country. And as long as they don't know you creatures of Fantastica as you really are, the manipulators do what they like with them. What can they do? Whatever they please,
When it comes to controlling human beings, there is no better instrument than lies. Because you see, humans live by beliefs. And beliefs can be manipulated. The power to manipulate beliefs is the only thing that counts. That's why I sided with the powerful and served them. Because I wanted to share their power. I want no part in it, Atreyu cried out. Take it easy, you little fool, the werewolf growled. When your turn comes to jump into the nothing, you too will be a nameless servant of power with no will of your own. Who knows what use they will make of you? Maybe you'll help them persuade people to buy things they don't need or hate things they know nothing about, or hold beliefs that makes them easy to handle, or doubt the truths that might save them. Yes, you little fantasticans, big things will be done in the human world with your help. Wars started, empires founded. For a time, Gmork peered at the boy out of half-closed eyes. Then he added, the human world is full of weak-minded people who think they are as clever as can be and are convinced that it's terribly important to persuade even the children that Fantastica doesn't exist. Maybe they will be able to make good use of you. Atreyu stood there with a bowed head. Now he knew why humans had stopped coming to Fantastica, and why none would come to give the childlike Empress new names. The more of Fantastica that was destroyed, the more lies flooded the human world, and the more unlikely it became that a child of man should come to Fantastica. It was a vicious circle from which there was no escape. Now Atreyu knew it. And so did someone else, Bastian Balthazar Bux. He now realized that not only was Fantastica sick, but the human world as well. The two were connected. He had always felt this, though he could not have explained why it was so. He had never been willing to believe that life had to be grey and dull as people claimed. He heard them saying, life is like that, but he couldn't agree. He never stopped believing in mysteries and miracles. And now he knew that someone would have to go to Fantastica to make both worlds well again. If no human knew the way, it was precisely because of the lies and delusions that came into the world because Fantastica was being destroyed. It was these lies and delusions that made people blind. With horror and shame, Bastian thought of his own lies. He didn't count the stories he made up. That was something entirely different. But now and then he had told deliberate lies, sometimes out of fear, sometimes as a way of getting something he wanted, sometimes just to puff himself up. What inhabitants of Fantastica might have been maimed and destroyed with his lies? One thing was plain. He too had contributed to the sad state of Fantastica. And he was determined to do something to make it well again. He owed it to Atreyu, who was prepared to make any sacrifice to bring Bastian to Fantastica. He had to find a way. The clock in the belfry struck 8. The werewolf had been watching Atreyu closely. Now you know how you can get to the human world, he said. Do you still want to go, Sonny? Atreyu shook his head. I don't want to turn into a lie, he said. You'll do it, whether you like it or not, said Gmork almost cheerfully. But what about you? Why are you here? I had a mission, Gmork said reluctantly. You too? Atreyu looked at the werewolf with interest, almost with sympathy. Were you successful? No. If I had been, I wouldn't be lying here chained. Everything went pretty well until I came to this city. The Dark Princess who ruled here received me with every honor. She invited me to her palace, fed me royally, and did everything to make me think she was on my side. And naturally, the inhabitants of this land of ghosts rather appealed to me. They made me feel at home, so to speak. The Dark Princess was very beautiful in her way, to my taste at least. She stroked me and ran her fingers through my coat. No one had ever caressed me like that. In short, I lost my head and let my tongue get out of hand. She pretended to admire me, I lapped it up, and in the end I told her about my mission. She must have cast a spell on me because I'm ordinarily a light sleeper. When I woke up I had this chain on me. And the Dark Princess was standing there. "Gmork," she said, "you forgot that I too am one of the creatures of Fantastica, and that to fight against Fantastica is to fight against me. That makes me your enemy, and I've outsmarted you. This chain can never be undone by anyone but me, but I'm going into the nothing with all my manservants and maidservants, and I shall never come back." Then she turned on her heel and left me. But all the spooks didn't follow her example. It was only when the nothing came closer that more and more of them were unable to resist its attraction. If I'm not mistaken, the last of them has just gone. Yes, Sonny, I fell into a trap. I listened too long to that woman. But you've fallen into the same trap. You've listened too long to me. For in these moments the nothing has closed around the city like a ring. You're caught, and there's no escape. "Then we'll die together," said Atreyu. "So we will," said Gmork. "But in very different ways, you little fool. For I shall die before the nothing gets here, but you will be swallowed up by it. There's a big difference. Because I die first, my story is at an end, but yours will go on forever in the form of a lie." "Why are you so wicked?" Atreyu asked. "Because you creatures had a world," Gmork replied darkly. "And I didn't." "What was your mission?" Up until then, Gmork had been sitting up. Now he slumped to the ground. He was plainly at the end of his strength, and he spoke in raucous gasps. "Those whom I served decided that Fantastica must be destroyed. But then they saw that their plan was endangered. They had learned that the childlike Empress had sent out a messenger, a great hero, and it looked as if he might succeed in bringing a human to Fantastica. They wanted to have him killed before it was too late. That was why they sent me, because I had been in Fantastica and knew my way around. I picked up his trail right away. I tracked him, day and night, gradually coming closer. Through the land of the Sassafranians, the jungle temple of Mumwamat, Howling Forest, the swamps of Sadness, the Dead Mountains. But then, in the deep chasm by Igramul's nest, I lost the track. He seemed to have dissolved into thin air. I went on searching. He had to be somewhere, but I never found his trail again. And this is where I ended up. I failed. But so has he, for Fantastica is going under. I forgot to tell you. His name was Atreyu." Gmork raised his head. The boy had taken a step back. "I am Atreyu," he said. A tremor ran through the werewolf's shrunken body. It came again and grew stronger and stronger. Then from his throat came a panting cough. It grew louder and more rasping. It swelled to a roar that echoed back from the city's walls. The werewolf was laughing. It was the most horrible sound Atreyu had ever heard. Never again was he to hear anything like it. And then suddenly it stopped. Gmork was dead. For a long time, Atreyu stood motionless. At length he approached the dead werewolf. He himself didn't know why. He bent over the head and touched the shaggy black fur. And in that moment, quicker than thought, Gmork's teeth snapped on Atreyu's leg. Even in death, the evil in him had lost none of its power. Desperately, Atreyu tried to break open the jaws. In vain. The gigantic teeth, as though held in place by steel clamps, dug into his flesh. Atreyu sank to the grimy pavement beside the werewolf's corpse, and step by step, soundless and irresistible, the nothing advanced from all sides, through the high black walls surrounding the city. Chapter 10. The Flight to the Ivory Tower. Just as Atreyu passed through the somber gateway of Spook City and started on the exploration that was to end so dismally in a squalid backyard, Falkor, the luck dragon, was making an astonishing discovery. While searching tirelessly for his little friend and master, he had flown high into the clouds.
On every side lay the sea, which was gradually growing calmer after the great storm that had churned it from top to bottom. Suddenly, far in the distance, Falkor caught sight of something that puzzled and intrigued him. It was as though a beam of golden light were going on and off at regular intervals. And that beam of light seemed to point directly at him, Falkor. He flew toward it as fast as he could, and when he was directly over it, he saw that the light signal came from deep down in the water, perhaps from the bottom of the sea. Luck dragons, as we know, are creatures of air and fire. Not only is the liquid element alien to them, it is also their enemy. Water can extinguish them like a flame, or it can asphyxiate them, for they never stop breathing in air through their thousands of pearly scales. They feed on air and heat, and require no other nourishment. But without air and heat, they can only live for a short time. Falkor didn't know what to do. He didn't even know what the strange blinking under the sea was, or whether it had anything to do with Atreyu. But he didn't hesitate for long. He flew high into the sky, turned around and head down, pressing his legs close to his body, which he held stiff and straight as a telegraph pole. He plummeted. The water spouted like a fountain as he hit the sea at top speed. The shock was so great that he almost lost consciousness, but he forced himself to open his ruby-red eyes. By then the blinking beam was close, only a few body lengths ahead of him. Air bubbles were forming around his body, as in a saucepan full of water just before it boils. He felt that he was cooling and weakening. With his last strength, he dived still deeper, and then the source of light was within reach. It was Orin, the gem. Luckily, the chain of the amulet had got caught on a coral branch growing out of the wall of an underwater chasm. Otherwise, the gem would have fallen into the bottomless depths. Falkor seized it and put the chain around his neck for fear of losing it, for he felt that he was about to faint. When he came to, he didn't know where he was. For to his amazement, he was flying through the air, and when he looked down, there was the sea again. He was flying in a very definite direction, and very fast, faster than would have seemed possible in his weakened condition. He tried to slow down, but soon found that his body would not obey him. An outside will, far stronger than his own, had taken possession of his body and was guiding it. That will came from Orin, the amulet suspended from a chain around his neck. The day was drawing to a close, when at last Falkor sighted the beach in the distance. He couldn't see much of the country beyond. It seemed to be hidden by fog. But when he came closer, he saw that most of the land had been swallowed up by the nothing, which hurt his eyes and gave him the feeling of being blind. At that point, Falkor would probably have turned back if he had been able to do as he wanted, but the mysterious power of the gem forced him to fly straight ahead, and soon he knew why. For in the midst of the endless nothing, he discovered a small island that was still holding out. An island covered with high gabled houses and crooked towers. Falkor had a strong suspicion whom he would find there, and from then on it was not only the powerful will of the amulet that spurred him on, but his own as well. It was almost dark in the somber backyard where Atreyu lay beside the dead werewolf. The luck dragon was barely able to distinguish the boy's light-colored body from the monster's black coat, and the darker it grew, the more they looked like one body. Atreyu had long given up trying to break loose from the steel vice of the werewolf's jaws. Dazed with fear and weakness, he was back in the grass ocean. Before him stood the purple buffalo he had not killed. He called to the other children, his companions of the hunt, who by then had no doubt become real hunters. But no one answered. Only the giant buffalo stood there motionless, looking at him. Atreyu called Artax, his horse, but he didn't come, and his cheery neigh was nowhere to be heard. He called the childlike empress, but in vain. He wouldn't be able to tell her anything. He hadn't become a hunter, and he was no longer a messenger. He was nobody. Atreyu had given up. But then he felt something else. The nothing. It must be very near, he thought. Again he felt its terrible force of attraction. It made him dizzy. He sat up, groaning, and tugged at his leg, but the fangs held fast. And in that he was lucky, for if Gmork's jaw had not held him, Falkor would have come too late. As it was, Atreyu suddenly heard the luck dragon's bronze voice in the sky above him. "Atreyu! Are you there, Atreyu?" "Falkor!" Atreyu shouted, and then he cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Falkor! Falkor! I'm here! Help me! I'm here!" And then he saw Falkor's white body daring like a living streak of lightning through the square of darkening sky. Far away at first, then closer. Atreyu kept shouting, and Falkor answered in his bell-like voice. Then at last, the dragon in the sky caught sight of the boy down below, no bigger than a bright speck in a dark hole. Falkor prepared for landing, but the backyard was small. There was hardly any light left, and the dragon brushed against one of the high-gabled houses. The roof collapsed with a roar. Falkor felt an agonizing pain. The sharp edge of the roof had cut deep into his body. This wasn't one of his usual graceful landings. He came tumbling down on the grimy, wet pavement next to Atreyu and the dead Gmork. He shook himself, sneezed like a dog coming out of the water, and said, "At last! So this is where you are. Oh well, I seem to have got here on time." Atreyu said nothing. He threw his arms around Falkor's neck and buried his face in the dragon's silvery white mane. "Come," said Falkor, "climb on my back. We have no time to lose." Atreyu only shook his head, and then Falkor saw that Atreyu's leg was imprisoned in the werewolf's jaw. "Don't worry," he said, rolling his ruby-red eyeballs. "We'll fix that in a jiffy." He set to with both paws, trying to pry Gmork's teeth apart. They didn't budge by a hairbreadth. Falkor heaved and panted. It was no use. Most likely, he would never have set his young friend free if luck hadn't come to his help. But luck dragons, as we know, are lucky, and so are those they are fond of. When Falkor stopped to rest, he bent over Gmork's head to get a better look at it in the dark, and it so happened that the childlike empress's amulet, which was hanging from the chain on the dragon's neck, touched the werewolf's forehead. Instantly the jaws opened, releasing Atreyu's leg. "Hey!" cried Falkor. "What do you think of that?" There was no answer from Atreyu. "What's wrong?" cried Falkor. "Atreyu, where are you?" He groped in the darkness for his friend, but Atreyu wasn't there, and while the dragon was trying to pierce the darkness with his glowing red eyes, he himself felt the pull that had snatched Atreyu away from him. The nothing was coming too close for comfort, but Orin protected the luck dragon from the pull. Atreyu was free from the werewolf's jaws, but not from the pull of the nothing. He tried to fight it, to kick, to push, but his limbs no longer obeyed him. A few feet more, and he would have been lost forever. In that moment, quick as lightning, Falkor grabbed him by his long blue-black hair and carried him up into the night-black sky. The clock in the belfry struck 9. Neither Atreyu nor Falkor could say later how long they had flown through the impenetrable darkness. Had it been only one night? Perhaps time had stopped for them, and they were hovering motionless in the limitless blackness. It was the longest night Atreyu had ever known, and the same was true for Falkor, who was much older. But even the longest and darkest of nights passes sooner or later. And when the pale dawn came, they climbed the ivory tower on the horizon. Here it seems necessary to pause for a moment and explain a special feature of Fantastica geography. Continents and oceans, mountains and watercourses have no fixed locations as in the real world. Thus it would be quite impossible to draw a map of Fantastica. In Fantastica, you can never be sure in advance what will be next to what. Even the directions north, south, east and west change from one part of the country to another. And the same goes for summer and winter, day and night. You can step out of a blazing hot desert straight into snowfields. In Fantastica, there are no measurable distances, so that near and far don't at all mean what they do in the real world. They vary with the traveler's wishes and state of mind. Since Fantastica has no boundaries, its center can be anywhere. Or to put it another way, it is equally near to or far from anywhere. It all depends on who is trying to reach the center, and the innermost center of Fantastica is the Ivory Tower. To his surprise, Atreyu found himself sitting on the luck dragon's back. He couldn't remember how he had got there. All he remembered was that Falkor had pulled him up by his hair. Feeling cold, he gathered in his cloak, which was fluttering behind him. And then he saw that it was grey. It had lost its colour, and so had his skin and hair. And Falkor, as Atreyu discovered in the rising light, was no better off. The dragon looked unreal, more like a swath of grey mist than anything else. They had both come too close to the nothing. "Atreyu, my little master," the dragon said softly, "does your wound hurt very badly?" About his own wound he said nothing. "No," said Atreyu, "I don't feel anything anymore." "Have you a fever?" "No, Falkor, I don't think so. Why do you ask?" "I can feel you trembling," said the dragon. "What in the world can make Atreyu tremble now?" After a short silence, Atreyu said, "We'll be there soon, and then I'll have to tell the childlike Empress that nothing can save her. That's harder than anything else I've had to do." "Yes," said Falkor, even more softly, "that's true." They flew in silence, drawing steadily nearer to the Ivory Tower. After a while, the dragon spoke again. "Have you seen her, Atreyu?" "Who?" "The childlike Empress, or rather, the golden-eyed commander of wishes, because that's how you must address her when you come into her presence." "No, I've never seen her." "I have. That was long ago. Your great-grandfather must have been a little boy at the time, and I was a young cloud-snapper with a head full of foolishness. One night I saw the moon shining so big and round, and I tried to grab it out of the sky. When I finally gave up, I dropped with exhaustion and landed near the Ivory Tower. That night, the magnolia pavilion had opened its petals wide, and the childlike Empress was sitting right in the middle of it. She cast a glance at me. Just one short glance, but I hardly know how to put it. That glance made a new dragon out of me." "What does she look like?" "Like a little girl. But she's much older than the oldest inhabitants of Fantastica. Or rather, she's ageless." "Yes," said Atreyu. "But now she's deathly sick. How can I tell her that there's no hope?" "Don't try to mislead her. She can't be fooled. Tell her the truth." "But suppose it kills her?" "I don't think it will work out that way," said Falkor. "You wouldn't," said Atreyu, "because you're a luck dragon." For a long while nothing was said. When at last they spoke together for the third time, it was Atreyu who broke the silence. "Falkor," he said, "I'd like to ask you one more thing." "Fire away." "Who is she?" "What do you mean?" "Orin has power over all the inhabitants of Fantastica. creatures of both light and darkness. It also has power over you and me, and yet the childlike Empress never exerts power. It's as if she weren't there, and yet she is in everything. Is she like us?" "No," said Falkor. "She's not like us. She's not a creature of Fantastica. We all exist because she exists. But she is of a different kind." "Then is she—" Atreyu hesitated. "Is she human?" "No," said Falkor. "She's not human." "Well then," and Atreyu repeated his question, "who is she?" After a long silence, Falkor answered, "No one in Fantastica knows. No one can know. That's the deepest secret of our world. I once heard a wise man say that if anyone were to know the whole answer, he would cease to exist. I don't know what he meant. That's all I can tell you." "And now," said Atreyu, "she'll die, and we'll die with her, and we'll never know her secret." This time Falkor made no answer, but a smile played around the corners of his leonine mouth, as though to say, "Nothing of the kind will happen." After that, they spoke no more. A little later they flew over the outer edge of the labyrinth, the maze of flower beds, hedges, and winding paths that surrounded the ivory tower on all sides. To their horror, they saw that there too the Nothing had been at work. True, it had touched only small spots in the labyrinth, but those spots were all about. The once bright-colored flower beds and shrubbery in between were now grey and withered. The branches of once graceful little trees were gnarled and bare. The green had gone out of the meadows, and a faint smell of rot and mold rose up to the newcomers. The only colour left were those of swollen giant mushrooms and of garish, poisonous-looking blooms that suggested nothing so much as the figments of a maddened brain. Enfeebled and trembling, the innermost heart of Fantastica was still resisting the inexorable encroachment of the Nothing. But the ivory tower, at the centre, still shimmered pure, immaculate, white. Ordinarily, flying messengers landed on one of the lower terraces, but Falkor reasoned that since neither he nor Atreyu had the strength to climb the long, spiraling street leading to the top of the tower, and since time was of the essence, the regulations and rules of etiquette could reasonably be ignored. He therefore decided on an emergency landing. Swooping down over the ivory buttresses, bridges, and balustrades, he located just in time the uppermost end of the spiraling high street which lay just outside the palace grounds. Plummeting to the roadway, he went into a skid, made several complete turns, and finally came to a stop tail first. Atreyu, who had been clinging with both arms to Falkor's neck, sat up and looked around. He had expected some sort of reception, or at least a detachment of palace guards to challenge them. But far and wide there was no one to be seen. All the life seemed to have gone out of the gleaming white building round about. "They've all fled," he thought. "They've left the childlike Empress alone, or she's already—" "Atreyu!" Falkor whispered. "You must give the gem back to her." Falkor removed the golden chain from his neck. It fell to the ground. Atreyu jumped down off Falkor's back and fell. He had forgotten his wound. He reached for the glory and put the chain around his neck. Then, leaning on the dragon, he rose painfully to his feet. "Falkor," he said, "where must I go?" But the luck dragon made no answer. He lay as though dead. The street ended in front of an enormous, intricately carved gate which led through a high white wall. The gate was open. Atreyu hobbled through it and came to a broad, gleaming white stairway that seemed to end in the sky. He began to climb. Now and then he stopped to rest. Drops of his blood left a trail behind him. At length, the stairway ended. Ahead of him lay a long gallery. He staggered ahead, clinging to the balustrade for support. Next, he came to a courtyard that seemed to be full of waterfalls and fountains, but by then he couldn't be sure of what he was seeing. He struggled forward, as in a dream. He came to a second, smaller gate. Then there was a long, narrow stairway, which took him to a garden where everything, trees, flowers, and animals, was carved from ivory. Crawling on all four, he crossed several arched bridges without railings, which led to a third gate, the smallest of all. He dragged himself through it on his belly, and slowly raising his eyes saw a dome-shaped hall of gleaming white ivory, and on top of it the Magnolia Pavilion. There was no path or stairway leading up to it. Atreyu buried his head in his hands. No one who reaches or has reached that pavilion can say how he got there. The last stretch of the way must come to him as a gift. Suddenly, Atreyu was in the doorway. He went in and found himself face to face with the golden-eyed commander of wishes. She was sitting, propped up on many cushions, on a soft round couch at the center of the great round blossom. She was looking straight at him. She seemed infinitely frail and delicate. Atreyu could see how ill she was by the pallor of her face, which seemed almost transparent. Her almond-shaped eyes, the color of dark gold, were serene and untroubled. She smiled. Her small, slight body was wrapped in an ample silken gown, which gleamed so white that the magnolia petals seemed dark beside it. She looked like an indescribable, beautiful little girl of no more than 10, but her long, smoothly combed hair, which hung down over her shoulders, was as white as snow. Bastian gave a start. Something incredible had happened. Thus far he had been able to visualize every incident of the Neverending story. Some of them, it couldn't be denied, were very strange, but they could somehow be explained. He had formed a clear picture of Atreyu riding on the luck dragon, of the labyrinth and the ivory tower. These pictures, however, existed only in his imagination. But when he came to the Magnolia Pavilion, he saw the face of the childlike empress, if only for a fraction of a second, for the space of a lightning flash, and not only in his thoughts, but with his eyes. It wasn't his imagination, of that Bastian was sure. He had even seen details that were not mentioned in the description, such as her eyebrows, 2 fine lines that might have been drawn with India ink, arching over her golden eyes, or her strangely elongated earlobes, or the way her head tilted on her slender neck. Bastian knew that he had never in his life seen anything so beautiful as this face, and in that same moment he knew her name, Moonchild. Yes, beyond a doubt, that was her name. And Moonchild had looked at him, Bastian Balthazar Bux. She had looked at him with an expression that he could not interpret. Had she too been taken by surprise? Had there been a plea in that look? Or longing? Or what could it be? He tried to remember Moonchild's eyes, but was no longer able to. He was sure of only one thing, that her glance had passed through his eyes and down into his heart. He could still feel the burning trail it had left behind. That glance, he felt, was embedded in his heart, and there it glittered like a mysterious jewel. And in a strange and wonderful way, it hurt. Even if Bastian had wanted to, he couldn't have defended himself against this thing that had happened to him. However, he didn't want to. Oh no, not for anything in the world would he have parted with that jewel. All he wanted was to go on reading, to see Moonchild again, to be with her. It never occurred to him that he was getting into the most unusual and perhaps the most dangerous of adventures. But even if he had known this, he wouldn't have dreamed of shutting the book. With a trembling forefinger, he found his place and went on reading. The clock in the belfry struck 10.